Alright, in this tutorial we're going to do an Excel macro that's going to call the user form and collect some data and then format some information on there and go ahead and calculate some values. So the main macro that you see there is going to, it'll start, and the first thing we're going to do is collect that data. Just as you can see in the flow chart, that data is going to get collected in a very similar user form to what you see there. So this will pop up in the screen, engineer's name. You'll be able to type that in as text, and then you have two options there. One is yield strength, and so the yield strength, that's going to be a option box where you can select either one of those yield strengths, and then the load type you can actually select multiple in the checkbox section there. That data that will get collected with that user form and pushed into the main macro. We'll go ahead and format the sheet and then calculate the values and print to sheet. So in order to do that, let's get into the actual code. With the code here, you're going to see what we're going to have in the middle is our main macro text. And so what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show that user form just like we called out there. Once that user form is shown, we move over to actually the text in the user form. And so this user form is basically collecting data, so whatever comes in text box 1, that's where the engineer's name was put in. And then we're going to go in, and with the option box, we're going to look for which option box was checked, and we will then spit out a yield strength based on whichever option box that is. And then we'll go down and set the default values for the dead and live load as 1 and 0, and based on if each of those are checked, we'll go ahead and change the dead or the live load. Once that's done, then we'll go ahead and hide the user form. That then puts us back here, and then we need to move forward in the coding here. You will realize that the formatting is currently missing there, and we'll go ahead and input that in when we get there. So let's go ahead and start off, and we're going to start this off by going to our developer tab, which if that's not showing for you, you can always go back to options here, customize the ribbon, make sure to check developer and hit OK. So now we have developer tab, and we'll go ahead and we'll just be starting a new macro. So we're going to call this user form. Go ahead and create that. So now, as mentioned, this is our main macro so far right here. And so we're going to go ahead and copy that and put that into the main macro text. Oftentimes, if you don't exit out of a cell, just as a heads up, it won't allow you to paste that back in. So you need to be exited out of all of that to do that portion. So that's actually going to be our main macro text. We will insert the formatting in here in just a second, but before we do that, we're going to go ahead and make a new user form. So up on the Insert tab, we're going to go ahead and click on the user form there, and that's going to bring up this dialog window with a user form. Notice how I can make it bigger or smaller. There's an infinite number of ways to edit this. We're going to keep it to as simple as possible, and so based on how we displayed that, we're going to try and mimic what was displayed. We'll go ahead and put in the label 1 here, and you can go in and just put in engineer's name. As I'm typing there, you can notice down in this property windows box that engineer's name is the caption that comes in there. Notice that you have all the different options here where you can put in font type and different things of that nature. Again, for now, we're going to keep this as simple as possible, but all of the options you have here are available to display that in a nice user, easy fashion. Okay, so there is engineer's name. That's just with the basic label. So that's a label. There's nothing that gets inputted based on that. That's just a basic label. We'll go ahead and look at the next one here, which is text box. So if I grab the one right next to that and put it in here, this is where the user would put in the engineer's name and actually type that in. And then we get into the two different types of checkboxes. You either have a option box or a checkbox. If you notice here, directly underneath the arrow, we have the checkbox and the option box. When we put these in, we need to actually put as well a frame in. So the frame defines which are the options that it's selecting from. So we're going to start off by putting this frame in here for the option boxes. And again, in that frame, I can either do the caption here, which is sometimes a little tricky, or I can actually come in here and just put in the yield strength. So there's yield strength right now. And then I will click out of that, bringing back the options, and I will put in one box for, this will be the 28,000 PSI. And then one more for the 36,000. Do note that oftentimes as you create macros, if you accidentally double click on here, it will oftentimes bring up another sub box here. This is basically as though if somebody were to click on the user form and double click there, it's saying you can actually create a new macro and have them have the macro do operations based on that double clicking. So you'll see a click there on the frame. So we'll actually delete that and cancel that. So it's good to you'll get used to that as you work within the macro itself. Okay, and now we will do one for the checkboxes. Again, the difference between the checkbox and the option box is the option box can have only one selected here. In the checkbox, you can have multiple selected. So there is our checkboxes there. Again, if we go in here to rename those, we'll have dead load. And then on the second one, we will have live load. Now, the last thing we're going to need in here is actually a button to go ahead and run this once it's established. So we'll put down here this command button, and this will essentially be a run command. So once you're done inputting the values, you'll have to go ahead and click that run, and then it will calculate it. So this button right here is actually where we're going to house all of the macro text or the programming once it's established. Think of this as once you click that button, it's asking the program, what do I want to do now? So again, I'm going to double click here, and that's going to bring up command button one click. And this is where we need to go back then and grab this information here. So all of this information under the user form command button macro. So once the command button is clicked, all of this information is going to be processed in the macro. So we'll go ahead and copy that. Get out of there and back here. In that text, you're going to say that text box 1, if I go back to here, notice that text box 1 is the name right here. So the name is text box 1. You could recreate this into a different name and put in all sorts of different options there for that. And again, please look through all these different options for ways to change all the information here. One thing that's really important here actually is the value. I can actually put a default value in here, and this will be really handy for your macro for your project where you actually have to put default values in. So coming back then, we will go to look at this, which is all complete. We're going to put in the text box engineer is the variable based on whatever's in text box 1. And then we set a default value for this variable called yield at 0, and then we change that based on which button is selected in the option buttons. And then here we have again some default values for the dead load and the live load, and based on if something's checked or not, we will go ahead and change those values. Do notice with the option box that we only have one variable here because there's only one option you can have, versus down with the check boxes we have two different variables listed here. You must, at the end of this, hide the user form in order to get back into the rest of the program. So that user form then hides that. These values then, the yield and the sfdead and the sflive, are then going to be transferred into the main macro text. So that is the last part. If you look back here at the beginning, these are the values that we want to be passing back and forth. The engineer, sfdead, sflive, and the yield. So those are actually a global declaration. This is very important in order to be able to pass variables from one sub-macro in a, say, for example, here the command button. You have to declare those as global. So the way we do that is I went ahead and copied those. We'll go back into the main macro there, and what we're going to do in that main macro, if I get out of this, in that main macro I'm going to go all the way to the top, hit enter, and once I'm all the way up at the top, you'll notice that it's going to come up with declarations, and because I'm up on top of that sub right there, anything that goes up here is my declarations, and a global value is going to go back and forth between any program listed in this macro. So again, just make sure that that says declarations up here, and it should be okay. So let's go ahead and save this. And we will go and look at our macro. So in order to run that, we'll come in here to our user form and we'll hit run. Notice that my default value of my name comes in, and we will click several buttons and hit run. And we get a value of the yield stress that's listed here. Now, one thing didn't come through, and that is the name here for the engineer did not come through, as well as if we look back, that formatting actually didn't come through. So remember, one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to actually format the sheet. After we collected, we needed to format that sheet. What you'll find is actually there was already a formatting macro here. If I run this formatting macro, it's going to put in the engineer's name is and the allowable yield is. So we actually want to run that inside the macro. So just to go back in, we're going to hit macro, we're going to go to the user form and hit edit, and we're going to go into the appropriate place, and we're going to do that right after the user form is done, and we're going to say application.run, and then we're going to put in our macro, which was formatting. Hit save there. Okay, I have this button to go ahead and clear that text. And then under the macro, we will run the user form. I think I forgot to put this in quotes. Run one more time. Okay, select our values, so, and hit run. Now we can see that the engineer is still not coming through. So in order to debug this, we can look through the text here, and so we'll see that once that user form is shown, and then actually we're going to do the application.run, what you're going to find is the application runs, and then this is calculated here, but we actually don't have anything that selects what's going on here. So in order to edit that, we need to put in cell A5 what engineer is. So we'll go back into the macro, and we will edit that. And right here, what we're going to do is just copy this because it's very similar to the same text that we're going to be trying to put in. And we're going to put under A5, we want to put the engineer value. So let's go ahead and save that. We're going to go ahead and clear the text. And then we're going to run the macro one last time. Let's see if that runs correctly. Okay. This time everything comes through. So that's a little bit about how to create a user form with a bit of debugging in there as well. And that is your tutorial.